My sister-in-law thinks I am invisible. She thinks I am the kind of woman who sits quietly at family dinners and says thank you when no one has given her anything. She thinks that because I do not drive a luxury car or wear designer clothes or talk loudly about my accomplishments, I must not have any. She has thought this for 6 years. I let her think it. That was my first mistake. No, actually, that was my first mistake. No, actually, that was my strategy. Let me start from the beginning. My name does not matter. What matters is this. I am 31 years old. I have 2 children, a 9-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old son. And for the last 4 years, I have been the silent majority owner of a property management company that my brother-in-law, my husband's older brother, believes he built entirely on his own. His name is on the front door. His face is on the website. His voice is the one that gives speeches at the Chamber of Commerce dinners I never attend. But my name is on the paperwork that matters. I want to tell you how we got here, because this story does not start with revenge. It starts with a woman who got very, very quiet and decided that quiet was not the same as weak. I married my husband 7 years ago. He is a good man, kind, steady, the sort of person who remembers your coffee order and shows up on time. His family, however, is a different situation. His mother is the kind of woman who keeps score at every holiday gathering. His father retired early and has strong opinions about everything he has never personally done. And his older brother Daniel is 38 years old and has been the family's golden child since approximately the day he was born. Daniel started a small property management company about 8 years ago. He manages residential rentals, handles leasing, maintenance coordination, tenant relations, that kind of work. When he started, he had about 12 units under management and a lot of ambition. His wife, my sister-in-law, her name is Renee, introduced herself to me at my first family Christmas dinner as Daniel's partner in everything. She said it while looking directly at my husband, not at me. I remember thinking, okay, I see what we are doing here. I had come from a background in commercial real estate finance. Before my kids were born, I spent 5 years at a firm that handled acquisition analysis for mid-size investment groups. I knew how to read a deal. I knew how to structure one. I knew which numbers mattered and which ones were just noise. I did not talk about this at family dinners because nobody asked, and because I had learned early on that Renee did not like it when attention moved away from Daniel. So I listened. I asked questions when I had them. I kept my opinions to myself. About 4 years ago, Daniel came to my husband asking for capital. His company had grown to nearly 80 units, but he had a chance to take on a portfolio of 43 additional properties from a landlord who was retiring. It was a good deal. Actually, it was a great deal. Below market rate, stable tenants, strong cash flow. Daniel needed an equity partner. He had already been turned down by 2 people in his network. He did not come to me. He came to my husband, who came home that evening and told me about it over dinner. I looked at the numbers Daniel had sent over. I stayed up until 2 in the morning going through the portfolio documentation. By the time I went to sleep, I had already restructured the deal in my head, 3 different ways, and identified the strongest one. The next morning, I told my husband I wanted to do it. Not him. Me. With my own capital. Money I had been saving and investing since I was 24 years old. Money that Renee and Daniel did not know existed because they had never once asked me a single question about my financial life. I had enough to cover 40% of what Daniel needed. My husband and I discussed it for 2 days. He supported me completely, the way he always does. We set up the arrangement through an LLC. My husband and I are listed as members. The LLC holds 42% equity in Daniel's company. Daniel received the capital he needed. He signed the operating agreement without reading it carefully enough. I know this because 3 of the clauses I included were ones a careful reader would have pushed back on. He did not push back. He was too relieved to have the money. He knew I was involved. What he did not fully absorb, apparently, was what majority silent partner actually means in practice. For 4 years, I received quarterly distributions. I reviewed the financials when they were sent over. I asked clarifying questions through the LLC email address, which Daniel answered promptly and professionally, apparently not connecting that the responses he was getting from our shared entity were being drafted by the woman he sees at Thanksgiving. I attended 0 company events. I gave 0 interviews. I drove my 7-year-old Honda to school pickups and soccer practice and said nothing at family dinners when Renee talked about Daniel's business like it was a monument he had erected with his bare hands. I want you to understand something. I did not do this to be secretive for the sake of it. I did it because I had watched Renee for 3 years by that point, and I knew exactly who she was. If she had known I held 42% equity in her husband's company, she would have made my life miserable in a completely different way. She would have treated me like a threat. She would have poisoned every family gathering, every holiday, every casual Sunday dinner, with tension and competition and the particular kind of cruelty that women like Renee are capable of when they feel their position is being challenged. I chose peace. I chose my children's experience of their family. I chose to let Daniel feel like the star of his own story. That choice had a limit. I found the limit on a Saturday evening in October. We were at my in-law's house for my father-in-law's birthday dinner. My mother-in-law had made lasagna. There were maybe 14 people there, cousins, an aunt, Daniel and Renee and their 2 teenage boys, my husband and me and our kids. My daughter was sitting at the kids' table with her younger cousin, and my son was on my lap for part of the evening because he gets overwhelmed in large groups, and I do not force him to perform sociability he is not ready for. Dinner was fine, loud, but fine. Daniel talked about a new contract his company had just signed, a small commercial property, his first foray outside pure residential. He was excited. My husband caught my eye across the table, and I gave him a small smile. That contract had been something I had suggested in the quarterly notes I sent through the LLC account 6 months earlier. I had flagged commercial adjacency as a natural growth path given the portfolio composition. Daniel had apparently taken the note and run with it without remembering where the idea had originated, or perhaps without ever connecting that it had come from me. That was fine. I was not keeping score, or rather, I was keeping score, but I was keeping it for myself, quietly, in a place where it did not make me bitter. After dinner, the adults were having coffee in the living room. The kids had drifted. My daughter was at the kitchen table with her younger cousin, drawing something. My son had fallen asleep against me on the couch. Renee was talking about their upcoming vacation, somewhere expensive, somewhere she had mentioned 3 times already that evening, and she turned to the room at large and said, in that particular tone she has, the one that sounds like observation but is actually performance. She said, "It must be nice to have a husband who actually provides. Some of us don't have to drive around in 10-year-old cars pretending that's a choice." There was a pause. The room had one of those moments where everyone heard it and no one knew what to do with it. My mother-in-law looked at the ceiling. My father-in-law suddenly became very interested in his coffee cup. My husband's jaw tightened. I said nothing. I had learned, a long time ago, that engaging with Renee directly was like arguing with a smoke alarm. Loud, pointless, and the thing causing the problem was never actually addressed. But my daughter heard it. She had looked up from the kitchen table. She is 9 years old, and she is perceptive in the way that quiet children often are. She looked at her aunt, and then she looked at me, and I watched her face trying to work out whether she had understood correctly. Then Renee, apparently deciding she had not been clear enough, turned slightly in the direction of the kitchen and said, to no one in particular but loudly enough for the room, and for my daughter to hear, "I just think it's important for kids to see ambition modeled at home. Success isn't something you stumble into." My daughter's face changed. I watched it happen. She looked at her drawing and then back at me, and I could see her processing what she thought that had meant. My son stirred in his sleep on my lap. I set down my coffee cup very carefully. I looked at Renee. I looked at Daniel, who was studying the middle distance with the focused attention of a man pretending to be somewhere else. I looked at my husband, who was already looking at me, and I gave him the smallest possible shake of my head. Not here, not like this. I excused myself to help my daughter gather her things. We left 20 minutes later, earlier than we had planned. In the car, my daughter was quiet for a long time, and then she asked me if Aunt Renee thought we were poor. I told her that Aunt Renee sometimes said things without thinking about who was listening. My daughter said, "But does she think you're not successful?" I said, "What do you think?" She thought about it. Then she said, "I think you're really smart, and you just don't talk about it." I almost cried in the car. I held it together until we got home and got both kids into bed, and then I sat in the kitchen for a long time by myself and I thought about what I was going to do. I want to be clear that what I decided was not impulsive. I did not make any phone calls that night. I did not send any emails. I did not do anything that could be described as reactive. What I did was go back through 4 years of documentation and make sure every piece of paperwork was exactly where it needed to be. The LLC operating agreement, the equity schedule, the board resolution we had filed when the commercial contract was signed, the one that required majority member approval for any new contracts above a certain threshold, the clause that gave majority members the right to call a formal review meeting with 30 days' notice. The distributions I had received, every quarter for 16 quarters, deposited quietly into an account that I had opened in my own name. Everything was in order. It always had been. I drafted a letter. It took me 4 drafts over 3 days to get it right. It was formal, professional, and it said 3 things. That I was exercising my right as majority equity holder to request a formal operational review, that I had engaged an outside accounting firm to conduct an independent audit as permitted under Section 7 of the operating agreement, and that I would be requiring Daniel's physical presence at a meeting to be scheduled within the next 30 days. I sent it through the LLC on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, Daniel had called my husband. I was in the kitchen when my husband came to find me. He handed me his phone and said, "He wants to talk to you." I took the phone. Daniel's voice was different from the voice I usually hear at family dinners. It was careful. Controlled, but careful. He said, "I didn't realize you were this involved." I said, "I know." He said, "You've been getting distributions this whole time." I said, "Yes, per the agreement." There was a long pause. I heard him breathing. Then he said, "Renee doesn't know." I said, "I'm aware." He said, "What do you want?" I said, "A meeting. 30 days. Bring your accountant. I'll bring mine." He said my name and then stopped. Started again. He said Saturday night, I said, was a business decision. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I see." I said, "Good. I want to tell you what happened at that meeting, but first I want to tell you what happened before it, because the before matters as much as the during." 2 days after I sent the letter, I got a call from my mother-in-law. She had heard from Renee. The call was not comfortable. She asked me why I was doing this, and I told her I was exercising rights I had held for 4 years. She said this felt like an attack on the family. I said I thought attacking the family was something that happened at birthday dinners, not in operating agreements. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You've been holding this for a long time." I said, "I've been patient for a long time. Those are different things." She did not call again after that. Renee sent me a text message. It was 3 paragraphs long and contained the words, betrayal, manipulative, and frankly shocking behavior. I read it once and did not respond. My husband, for his part, was exactly who he always is. He made me coffee every morning that week. He took the kids to school. He told me once, quietly, that he was proud of me. And I told him I was not doing it to be proud of. I was doing it because I had earned the right to do it, and because my daughter deserved to know that her mother's silence had never been the same thing as her mother's smallness. The meeting happened on a Thursday morning at the offices of the accounting firm I had retained. Daniel came with his bookkeeper and a business attorney he had clearly hired recently because I did not recognize him from any previous documentation. I came with my own attorney, who had been reviewing the operating agreement for 2 weeks. Daniel looked tired. He looked like a man who had spent the previous month discovering things about his own company that he should have known for 4 years. We sat across from each other at a conference table for the first time in our lives, as what we actually were, business partners. The audit findings were straightforward. The company was healthy. The financials were accurate. There were no irregularities. There was, however, a growth trajectory that my outside accountant had modeled out, which suggested the company was significantly under-leveraged relative to its portfolio value, and that there were 3 acquisition opportunities in the current market that a well-capitalized entity in their position should be seriously considering. I had prepared the analysis myself. 12 pages. I slid a copy across the table to Daniel. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. His attorney leaned over and said something quietly to him. Daniel looked up. He said, "You did this analysis?" I said, "Yes." He said, "When?" I said, "Over the last 3 weeks. Though some of it I've been tracking for about 2 years. He was quiet again. He turned to page 4, which was the section on the first acquisition target. He read it for a moment. Something shifted in his face. Not quite what I expected, not defensiveness or anger, but something closer to recognition. He said, "This is good." I said, "I know." He sat back. He looked at me across the table, the way you look at someone when you realize you have fundamentally misread them for a very long time. It was not a comfortable look for either of us, but it was an honest one. He said, "I think we should have been having these meetings for the last 4 years." I said, "Yes, we should have." His attorney shifted slightly in his chair. My attorney was very still in the practiced way that good attorneys are still when things are going well. Daniel said, "I owe you an apology, for more than just the business side." I let a moment pass. Then I said, "I'm not looking for apologies, Daniel. I'm looking for a functional partnership and a company that reaches what it's capable of reaching." He nodded slowly. He said, "What do you need from me?" I said, "Transparency, regular meetings, and I need Renee to understand what I am to this company so that the next time she has something to say about my car or my ambition or what my children are learning at home, she understands the full context of who she is saying it to." He flinched slightly at that. Then he nodded. That conversation with Renee happened separately, and I was not there for it. That was Daniel's responsibility, and from everything my husband has told me, it was not a short conversation. She called me once, about a week later. The call was brief. She said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't." She said, "I said some things that I shouldn't have said in front of your daughter." I said, "Yes." She didn't say she was sorry exactly, but she said she understood if I was angry. I told her I wasn't angry anymore. That was true. Anger is expensive, and I had already spent what I was willing to spend. The company is operating differently now. We have quarterly meetings at an actual conference table, not just reports sent through email. The first acquisition I recommended closed 2 months after that Thursday meeting. It added 31 units to the portfolio and came in at a per-unit cost that my model had projected within 2%. Daniel sent me a text when it closed. He said, "You were right." I said, "I usually am." He sent back a laughing emoji, and I thought, okay, this is what functional looks like. We can work with this. My daughter does not know the specifics of any of this. She is 9. She does not need to know about equity structures and operating agreements and what 42% means in a boardroom. What she does know is that a few weeks after that birthday dinner, she asked me again whether I was successful. And I told her that success is a word people use to describe things they can see, and that some of the most important things I had ever done in my life had happened in places where no one was watching. She thought about that for a minute. Then she said, "Like how you always know the answer, but you wait for other people to figure it out first." I looked at her. I said, "Exactly like that." She nodded, like this confirmed something she had already suspected. She is 9 years old, and she is going to be extraordinary. I am making sure she grows up knowing that quiet is a tactic, not a defeat, that patience is not the same as passivity, that the most powerful position you can be in is the one where someone has completely underestimated you and signed paperwork confirming it. Renee still talks at family dinners. She still finds ways to redirect conversations toward what Daniel has built. But sometimes now she catches herself mid-sentence and glances at me, and I watch her remember something she would rather forget. I don't say anything. I never needed to say anything. My car is still 7 years old. It runs fine. I'm thinking about keeping it another 3 years, just on principle. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely love knowing where these stories land. And if someone in your life has ever looked at your silence and called it weakness, I want to hear that too. Because I have a feeling I am not the only one in this room who has been keeping very careful, very quiet count.